We like to tell ourselves noble stories about war. We say war is fought for freedom, for honor, for God, for civilization, for security, for the flag. Every age invents a cleaner slogan, a better poster, a more stirring anthem. Kings spoke of glory, empires spoke of destiny, republics speak of values, revolutionaries speak of liberation. But if you lay the centuries side by side and scrape away the paint, the machinery underneath looks brutally familiar. We go to war because human beings organize power the same way they always have, around land, wealth, fear, and the control of other people. That is the darker history, not the speeches, the invoices. Look at the ancient world. Why did the first states fight? Not because they had abstract philosophies of nationhood. They fought over river valleys, grain fields, trade routes, irrigation, tribute, and slaves. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, Assyria, Persia, the practical heart of warfare was simple. Who controls the land that feeds armies, the roads that move merchants, and the bodies that can be taxed, conscripted, or sold? The earliest empires did not expand because they were bored. They expanded because conquest paid. It brought grain into storehouses, precious metals into treasuries, labor into chains, and enemies into obedience. The Greeks gave us poetry about war, but they also gave us a plain lesson. City-states fought over sea lanes, colonies, tribute, and power. Athens wrapped empire in the language of leadership, but its fleet was paid for by extraction from allies who gradually stopped being allies at all. Sparta defended its order with permanent violence because its own society depended on subjugated labor. Behind the marble and philosophy sat a hard fact. Wealth and power require enforcement, and enforcement often spills into war. Rome perfected this hypocrisy into an art form. Rome claimed it fought defensive wars with astonishing frequency, which is curious, because those defensive wars somehow ended with Rome owning other people's land. Again and again, Roman expansion was explained as preemption, stabilization, punishment, necessity. But the pattern is obvious. Victory meant territory, mines, taxes, slaves, prestige for generals, land for colonists, and loot for the state. War was not an interruption of Roman politics. It was one of its central industries. And that is one of the oldest truths in history. War is often profitable long before it is moralized. When empires grow, war becomes more than raiding. It becomes a business model. Move forward into the medieval and early modern world, and the banners change, but the logic survives. Dynastic wars were dressed in bloodlines and claims to thrones, yet beneath inheritance disputes lay revenue, ports, toll roads, fertile provinces, and strategic fortresses. Religion fueled wars, yes, but religion rarely acted alone. Faith was often the flag carried by political and economic interests. Men did not march for theology only. Rulers knew belief could mobilize populations for contests whose real prizes were territory, authority, and wealth. Then maritime empires arrived, and the scale widened. Now war could be fought not just for nearby fields, but for entire overseas systems of extraction. European powers did not cross oceans out of pure curiosity. They came for spices, silver, gold, sugar, land, timber, furs, later rubber, cotton, tea, opium, coal, and oil. They came for captive labor and controlled markets. They came to seize choke points in global trade. The language of mission and civilization helped soothe consciences at home. But the accounting books were honest in a way the sermons were not. The conquest of the Americas, Africa, and large parts of Asia was not a misunderstanding. It was organized violence in pursuit of resources and labor. Entire peoples were displaced or destroyed because they stood on profitable ground. If you want the dark answer to why we go to war, look there. War is often what happens when wealth lies beneath someone else's feet. The modern age did not purify this pattern, it mechanized it. Take the great wars of the 19th and 20th centuries. Nationalism mattered, ideology mattered, pride mattered. But so did steel, coal, railways, colonies, shipping lanes, industrial output, and access to raw materials. Industrial powers required constant inputs: iron, rubber, oil, nitrates, food, labor, markets. Once states became industrial, the hunger of war and the hunger that caused war began feeding each other. World War I is often described as a tragic chain of alliances and assassinations, and that is true as far as it goes. But Europe had become a pressure chamber of rival empires competing for influence, colonies, prestige, and economic dominance. The assassination lit the fuse, but the explosives had been stacked for decades. Imperial competition, arms races, domestic unrest, elite fear, and the belief that a quick war could secure a better position. World War II is clearer still. Nazi ideology was monstrous and central, but empire was built into it. The German drive eastward was not just hatred in motion, it was also a plan for land, food, labor, and resources. Japan's imperial expansion was sold as regional leadership, but it was deeply tied to the need for oil, rubber, iron, and strategic independence from Western embargoes. When great powers speak of survival, they often mean access to fuel, trade, labor, and strategic depth. Then comes the age in which we most flatter ourselves, the modern world of law, sovereignty, and human rights. Yet even here, the old motives breathe through new language. The Cold War was framed as a struggle of ideas: capitalism versus communism, freedom versus tyranny. And yes, ideology mattered deeply. But the map of conflict overlaps suspiciously well with strategic minerals, oil zones, shipping routes, client states, and spheres of influence. Superpowers armed coups, insurgencies, dictatorships, and proxy wars not because they were confused about morality, but because influence has value, ports have value, pipelines have value, friendly governments have value. Hostile governments, sitting on key resources, have even more value. This is one of the ugliest recurring patterns in war. Leaders rarely say, "We are doing this because it benefits us materially." They say, "We are doing this because we must." Security becomes the respectable mask worn by appetite. Sometimes the threat is real. Often it is exaggerated. Fear is the most effective salesman war has ever had.